All right. So,
Right.
Lucy, tell us what your chapter is about in Scars to Stars 4.
Okay, so it's a memoir. Of course, a very, very compact version of a memoir, because of course there's a lot more details to the real story, but it is a compact memoir of how I was able to go from nothing, from basically literally nothing, leaving a cult, migrating to Mexico, not having a job, not having a college education, not really having any connections outside of people who I grew up with in the cult, to creating a thriving business, a few thriving businesses worth a few $1 million. And my purpose is to inspire people who are struggling, in particular people who have been through difficulties such as abuse or neglect, feeling maybe not having the opportunity to have an education that they wanted to have, and to inspire that it's possible, it can be done.
I got into basketball because in Scars to Stars #1 and Volume 2, I talk about this more, but I have 12 stints in my heart. I was a very active person before, did a lot of weightlifting, carried a cross, actually the length of Illinois, and I really relied on my strength and everything. So at 35, I ended up having chest pains and went into the hospital, and they told me that I had the arteries of a 75-year-old, and then they ended up putting 5 stents in my heart, and I had a stroke. So at 35 years old, my whole world turned upside down. And since then, I have gone through a roller coaster of not just the physical part of that, the mental, and trying to move forward in life. And one thing or another has been going on in life, and just kind of feels like, after time you get beat down. And then I started limiting myself more and more on what I could do. And I can't tell you how many nights that I went to bed with a lot of chest pain, and I'm wondering, am I going to wake up tomorrow? Is this a time where I should be calling the hospital? Is this another false flag? Not knowing, and seeing so many people out there enjoying life while you're just sitting on a bench watching it.
But in this chapter, that's the basis. But in this chapter, I'm very, very vulnerable. I'm going to share with you my journey all the way from 15 to where I am now. All of the stays in the mental institutions or psychiatric hospitals, the troubles that I put my family through, and all of the things that have happened in my life to bring me to this point. While I was writing this chapter, I was able to literally work through some things and somewhat forgive my family and realize my part in what had happened. None of us come with an owner's manual of, hey, if she does this is what we're going to do, because, oh my gosh, that's not even in there. How do we address this? So what happens is, a lot of people, what do? We want to shut down. And so it's a very, very vulnerable chapter this time.
My chapter is about a very specific date. At least that's what Leeds begins in. It's a very specific date, September 22nd, 2004. I was a street-level drug addict and alcoholic and criminal. And I was arrested for what I hope was the last time. And it's the story of where I was at that point, and then what I did to get to a point where I had at least a modicum of self-esteem, but it allowed me to grow into the man that I am today. I am a kind and gentle person today. I wasn't before. And it's about that date and about that journey to become the man I am today.
My chapter is about dealing with my disability on a daily basis, graduating high school and college. Also in my story, I talk about a few of my accomplishments as well. Surgery struggles for my scoliosis in 2012 and complications from that. I had an aide from 7th grade to senior year that made school absolutely awful. I talk about how she talked down to me and she was always leaving the room on me.
My story is called Addicted to Approval, and it is the lifelong journey of trying to find what made me feel enough in the world. And depending on other people's approval of what I did, whether it was personal or professional or a job, whatever it was, I was always looking for someone else to say I was enough. And when I finally found my purpose and my why and my passion later in life, how all of that went away. And it was really about, having that purpose in the world and finding your niche and your special thing that you were put on this earth for. And when you find that, it makes all that external approval not needed. So I hope that helps somebody. And I think it's important for us to find that passion in our life that can drive us forward and make us feel like we have a purpose in the world. It's important.
Yeah, definitely a shout out to James. It has been a journey. I definitely wouldn't be here without him, and with you, of course. But just briefly about my story, I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse by a family member, and then continued trauma, unfortunately, throughout the years of abuse from partners and relationships and things like that. And I talk about how it affected me when I was little, and having to, unfortunately, keep something like that silent. I was not allowed to tell my family members. I wasn't allowed to tell my friends. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody. I just had to keep it all bottled down. So when I finally said something to one of my parents, she continued that. And unfortunately, at the time, we weren't able to do much. I've worked through the years to get where I am now. But I did have a point in my life where suicide I thought was an option.
It's a continuation of stories about different incidents that happened with different officers and officials in the police department where, I was yelled and screamed at, or had somebody try to knock my weapon out of my hands because they thought I was pointing it someplace that I shouldn't be. Just all kinds of things that happened, and what they have done to me over time. I was 10 years on the job total, and after 5 years, inside something snapped. Like I knew that this was just no good for me anymore, and was just trying to, wait it out. Maybe I'll make sergeant and it'll get a little better. Maybe another job opportunity with another department might open up, and I can just laterally transfer. So I just stayed, in that situation. Some people would say, why didn't you get out? But, you never realize that when you're in it. I just was hoping that things would eventually change.
Well, unfortunately, I grew up in a broken home. And though I'm not saying that my parents didn't try to give me the best, but they didn't know any better. And so some of the things that I had to experience and some of the things that I was exposed to, you would never see kids be exposed to that kind of stuff now. There was a lot of violence, screaming, yelling, fighting, threats of physical harm, some actual physical harm. And when I became a parent, one of my greatest fears was that I was going to repeat those patterns. So there was a long period of time that I didn't want to be a parent, because in my mind, I kept believing that it was inevitable, that it was just a part of who I am. It was in my DNA, and there was no way that I could be a better person. And when I was pregnant with my first son, you would think that that would be a happy moment, a joyous moment. And for me, it was sad. because I kept thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to raise this child? I'm going to ruin this child and perpetuate. Even though I didn't have the words to articulate it at the time, I knew that if I didn't do something or make a change or learn something different, that I was just going to keep on doing the same thing. And then my child's going to repeat the patterns as well.
And I started my career back in 1987 as a teaching fellow over in the People's Republic of China. And I was up in an area of the country that hadn't been open very long. And so white people were very rare. And it was really fascinating because it was like being a rock star. And it was fun for a while because everywhere you went, people were fascinated with you. And then after a while, it was absolutely cumbersome because you couldn't go anywhere without everybody looking at you. You couldn't stop anywhere without people gathering around you. You couldn't ride your bicycle without people, running into things because they're sitting there gawking at you. And it was a wonderful experience until it wasn't. And I spoke of a tragedy that happened that quickly ended my tenure there. And one of the teachers that I was with was brutally murdered, and the murder was never solved. And that was pretty much one of the bookends of my teaching career.
It goes into a little bit of growing up in a little Midwest town, and unfortunately and very tragically, my aunt and uncle and two cousins were murdered in very, very small America. And we just didn't talk about it a lot growing up, or actually at all. They were there one day and then they weren't. And so I was 12. I was the third oldest of 26 grandkids. So there was a lot of little people that maybe needed to be talked to a little bit more. But when I say that, I can't imagine being a sister or brother who lost their sister and brother and trying to explain that to all these little people, and how do they navigate it themselves. So I've never looked back and be like, oh my gosh, you guys should have done this differently. And no, because you don't know how you're going to react to that or how you're going to get through that as not only a parent. So, yeah. And it taught me at a very young age how to bottle stuff up. We didn't talk about it. Didn't receive any counseling. And again, this was the early 90s. So it was very taboo at the time to get any help. But that really was a pivotal time that I do believe changed the trajectory of my life. So
I was 10 years old, and my best friend had an older teenage brother that would inappropriately abuse me late at night, and then at the lake house when we'd go on vacations, and it would happen all the time. And because I didn't really understand any of that as a 10-year-old, I just thought that it was okay, but then I also didn't tell anybody about it because it was embarrassing and I thought I'd get in trouble. And so it did a lot of damage. But what furthered that is my dad, in the same year, I was still 10, my dad left our family. He had a midlife crisis, and then he didn't really contact the kids anymore. And so I had really bad daddy issues, as they call them, and so in my teenage years, I started using drugs because I was self-medicating. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was just, wild and wanting to live life how I wanted to. And it wasn't until 2012, after I had been a stripper and a prostitute and a heroin addict, that I challenged a God I did not believe in.
So in 5th grade, there was about 6 of us in total, and we were being drugged and shared between 2 men. It went on for about a year, and then nobody knew anything about it until 2021. That's when people actually found out about it. We had some justice at the end there. So all those years later, we got it. But up until that point, nobody knew. My family didn't. My husband didn't. Until the day a cop showed up at my door, and he was like, "Hey, we got to talk." Like, oh, probably need to elaborate why he's here. And now they're both in prison. So